show you the studio market shares for these different studio companies over the past 16 years, starting from 2000 all the way up to 2016. And the reason I want to do this is because, one, I want to show you something. There's a pattern that goes on here. Now, when you look back in 2000, the studio Buena Vista, which is the studio that works along with Marvel Studios came into being somewhere around 2011, 2012. The studio Buena Vista, which is an arm of Walt Disney, was the #1 ranked studio in the world. Put out 21 movies in 2000, raked in $1.175 billion, had 15% of the market share. The second rank was Universal, with 14.1% of the market share, put out 13 movies, made $1 billion. Warner Brothers, they had 11.9% of the market share, put out 22 movies, okay, and was able to pull in under $1 billion, okay. And then the fourth was Paramount. Paramount, 10.4% of the market share and $791 million. I want to show you something now. Warner Brothers now goes to the top of the rankings in 2001, having 15.1% of the market share, putting out 27 movies in that year and pulling in the only studio to pull in over $1 billion. Okay? Second was Universal, then Paramount, and then Buena Vista. Now keep an eye on these guys, right? 20th Century Fox comes into the equation. In the year 2002, Sony Columbia, they are the #1 market share with 17.2%. They and two other studios, Buena Vista and Warner Brothers, crossed the $1 billion mark. They put out 31 movies that year, and Buena Vista put out 22. Warner Brothers put out 28. Again, Warner Brothers has this huge turnover of movies every single year. In 2003, Buena Vista comes to the top again, as it did in 2001. They have 16.5% of the market share, $1.5 billion. There are 4 other studios that have been able to do the same thing. Sony Columbia, 13%, $1.19 billion. Warner Brothers, $1.1 billion, and Universal, $1 billion. But once again, Warner Brothers puts out 20 movies. Sony Columbia puts out 24, outworks Warner Brothers that year. In 2004, Sony Columbia again at the #1 top of the charts once again. And they have 14.3% of the market share, $1.3 billion, 17 movies. Warner Brothers is the second again, 12.9% of the market share, $1.2 billion, 22 movies. You got Buena Vista right in third with 12.4% of the market share, $1.1 billion, 20 movies. And remember, at the time, Buena Vista was mostly into the animations. That's where they made most of their money. Families would come to see their films, so they didn't have to put out as much films as, say, Warner Brothers. Warner Bros. Comes back to the top of the charts in the year 2005, 15.6% of the market share, $1.3 billion, 19 movies. 20th Century Fox is second with 15.3% of the market share, $1.3 billion as well, 18 movies. Universal with 19 movies, $1 billion, 11.4% of the market share. Buena Vista was fifth, just under $1 billion. 2016, Sony Columbia is again in the #1 spot, 18.6% of the market share, $1.7 billion, 27 movies they put out, a lot of movies they put out that year. Buena Vista, 16.2% of the market share, $1.5 billion, 19 movies put out. 20th Century Fox is in third, 15.2% of the market share, $1.3 billion, $1.4 billion, 24 movies. Warner Brothers, 11.6% of the market share, again over the $1 billion mark with 21 movies. Now I want you to bear in mind something. Warner Brothers is always in the top 5. There's no time in the history since 2000 since it hasn't been in the top 5, right? Sony Columbia, has been in the top 5. Buena Vista has been in the top 5. 20th Century Fox has been in the top 5. And Paramount, and sometimes Universal, but not always. They have not always been in the top 5. Paramount and Universal sometimes are not there, right? In the year 2007, Paramount is the number 1 studio doing business. 15.5% of the market share, $1.5 billion, 16 films Paramount puts out. Of course, one of which is Transformers, the very first Transformers film, which helped to aid in this huge amount, this $1 billion, was because of Transformers. Warner Brothers, on the other hand, in 2007, they just have accumulation of films, 24 films, of which they made $1.4 billion, 14.7% of the market share. Buena Vista is in third with 14% of the market share with only 13 movies that year. Just to tell you how much their animation makes so much money. Sony Columbia, 25 films that year, outworking Warner Brothers that year, 12.9% of the market share, $1.2 billion. Universal, 11.4% of the market share, $1.1 billion. And for the first time, the 6th place 20th Century Fox also making over $1 billion. So just notice that. In 2008 and onwards, we had the Dark Knight trilogy, right? We had Batman Begins, I believe it was in 2008 or, I think 2009 or it's 2010 we had the Dark Knight. So 2008 we had the Batman Begins. That was the year Warner Bros. Put out 20 films. They made $1.8 billion, 18% of the market share. Paramount had 16% of the market share with $1.5 billion. Sony Columbia made 13% of the market share with $1.2 billion, 1.3. And Universal had 11% of the market share, $1 billion. 20th Century Fox had close to 11% of the market share, $1 billion. And even Buena Vista, who's not even in the top 10 this time, had $1 billion on top 5, had $1 billion, 10.5% of the market share. So Buena Vista was not in the top 5 for the first time, whereas we had Warner Brothers, who had never gotten lower than the top 4. All right, but these are the major studios. Then in 2009, this is the advent of either The Dark Knight or Batman Begins. I can't remember which one it is. But in that year, Warner Brothers raked in the top dollar. It really went all the way out. I think it's because of The Dark Knight. I think The Dark Knight came out in 2009, if I'm not mistaken. And in that year, Warner Brothers made $2.1 billion, blew everything away, had 28, outworked everybody, had the most amount of movies, very productive, 19.7% of the market share. Paramount came in next with 13.8% of the market share, 13 movies. Sony Columbia, 13.6% of the market share. 20th Century Fox, 13.1%. And Buena Vista with 11.5% of the market share, $1.2 billion. All the heavy hitters doing their thing. Now in 2010, Warner Brothers again takes the cake. It's like nobody can even compare. 18% of the market share, almost $2 billion. 27 movies. Paramount, again, always outworking everybody. Paramount had 16.1% of the market share, $1.7 billion. 14 movies. Again, a Transformers movie probably was about to happen that year. I think the next year. I wouldn't be surprised if Paramount takes it because I think in 2011 they had a Transformers movie. 20th Century Fox, again, it comes in third. Buena Vista comes in fourth. Sony Columbia comes in fifth. Everybody crossing $1 billion and really making money. You'll see the figures go up and up and up. Paramount, like I said, it was a Transformers movie a year. $1.957 billion over 15 movies. That's really very profitable. Warner Brothers with their big number of movies, 26 movies, $1.826 billion. They came in second. Sony Columbia came in third, $1.2 billion, 12% of the market share. Buena Vista with 12% of the market share as well, $1.2 billion. The year 2012, so Sony Columbia take over. They had 19 movies, $1.8 billion, 16.1% of the market share. Warner Brothers again coming in second, showing how dominant it really is. It never went below fourth. $1.7 billion, 24 movies out. Warner Bros. Always puts out more movies than everybody else, right? Buena Vista came in third, 13.9% of market share, $1.6 billion, 13 films in. Again, Buena Vista. They don't put out a lot of films, but when they put out films, they make money, okay? Universal, 16 movies were put out, 11.9% of the market share in Lionsgate. Also crossing a billion, 11.1% of the market share, as well as 20th Century Fox. 2013, what do you think? This was the year with Man of Steel, and Man of Steel helped Warner Brothers to cross Buena Vista. Now remember, Avengers came out, I believe, in 2011, all right, and Buena Vista was still not at the top of the charts because Transformers that came out that year, so Paramount took the top billing. Right? 2013, Warner Brothers puts out 25 films again, 16.2% of the market share. This is 2013. This is the year when Superman, Man of Steel came out. Courtesy of Man of Steel, they pushed all the way up to $1.9 billion, 16.2% of market share, only seconded by Buena Vista. If Man of Steel didn't come out that year, I think Buena Vista would have taken it. Universal comes out with $1.4 billion, Sony 1.1, Lionsgate, first time we're seeing Lionsgate in this top 5 building, $1 billion, and 20th Century Fox just below, okay? Paramount's nowhere in the top 10. Now, so far, the only, top 5, the only 2 companies that managed to stay in the top 5 are Warner Brothers and Sony Columbia. Not even Buena Vista did it. Universal didn't do it. Paramount didn't do it. Lionsgate didn't do it. 20th Century Fox didn't do it. Right? So you see the standard Warner Brothers has. Right? Let's keep it going. But it's because also they work everybody. They put out a lot more films than probably any other production company. So that may be the reason as well. 20th Century Fox, 16.5% of the market share in 2014. This is the year that they put out their X-Men movie, of course. $1.79 million. Buena Vista, 1.8. 17 movies, right? Buena Vista comes in second, 14.9% of the market share, $1.6 billion. They only put out 13 movies. Buena Vista always got this. They got movies where people go to see them and they really pay money. Buena Vista. All right? Buena Vista, by the way, is Disney, right? Warner Brothers, 14.4% of the market share, 1.5, close to $1.6 billion. Again, out hustling everybody. Got 22 movies out there. And the thing about Warner Brothers that you got to notice, and watch Sony Columbia, as I said before, always in the top 5. Sony Columbia, 11.6% of market share, 1.2, close to $1.3 billion, 19 films. Universal comes in fourth with, again, $1.1 billion, Paramount, $1 billion, right? But my point is this. Warner Brothers and Sony Columbia, those two are always in the top 5. Always. You go check it out. From beginning of time till now, they're always in the top 5, right? Let's keep it going. Warner Brothers, again, is in the top 5. Sony Columbia makes it to the 5th place. Universal is at the top. Universal, 21.3% of market share. That's ridiculous. $2.4 billion, I guess, because of the Transformers movie or something. I'm not too sure what it could be, right? But anyway, 21 movies they put out. Buena Vista, at this point in time, is doing Captain America Civil War, did Captain America The Winter Soldier, right? 19.8% of market share. They blew up huge, $2.2 billion, almost $2.3 billion, with only 11 movies, y'all. Only 11 movies. It's crazy. Warner Brothers, 26 movies, still keeping its percentage of market share, 13.9%, $1.6 billion. That's kind of like around about where Warner Brothers always does it. 26 movies put out. Again, I'll hustle everybody, okay? 20th Century Fox, they did all right. 11.3%, $1.3 billion. Sony Columbia closing it out, $8.4 billion. Did not cut $1 billion for a change. Okay, and then Paramount and then Lionsgate. This is what it's shaping up to be looking like in 2016. All right, Buena Vista way ahead of everybody. 26.5% of the market share. $2.1 billion so far gross for the year. They only put out 8 movies. Wow. Warner Brothers has only put out, this is going to be probably adjusted because they always put out about 20 something movies. So by the end of the year they'll have their quotas, I'm sure, both of them. But at the present moment, Warner Brothers 16.5% of market share, $1.3 billion. They probably will get higher by the end of the year. But the point anyway is this. $1.3 billion is saying, of course, this is probably going to be updated because Suicide Squad is there. I'm pretty sure Suicide Squad it's going to make $7 billion, right? And then when you look at Batman v Superman, which almost made $9 billion, 7 and 9 is how much? Yeah, so it's way over that right now. But you know, all of these figures are going to be adjusted. $1.3 billion, 14 movies out. Buena Vista 8 movies out, 20th Century Fox 9 movies out. I think they're kind of behind in their tracking. Universal 12.9% of market share, $1.24 billion. And Sony, as I said before, always in the top 5, 7.7%, $611 million, right? 14 movies in. But I believe that at the end of the day, we're going to see Sony somewhere in the top 5 at the end of the day. And Warner Brothers, they're the only two companies that always keep that standard. You can see how high the standard of Warner Brothers is, though. It's always somewhere in the top 4. It hasn't gotten below the top 4. That's what makes Warner Brothers what it is. Warner Brothers, they produce more movies than everybody else. They have a wider array of movies than everybody else. They do really well with whatever movie they do. They always do box office numbers, even though sometimes some movies flop, right? And what's amazing that a lot of people are not giving them credit for, but I gotta give Buena Vista credit. They're really starting to blow up. Okay, look at that. Look at that. Look at their market share compared to everybody else. They made a huge move, a huge step, a huge leap almost within just a year or something, right? But of course, it's going to change, and I guess the field's going to catch up. We don't know who's going to actually take over and get to that top spot. It looks like there's a big clearance between Buena Vista and Warner Brothers at the present moment. Of course, everything will kind of even off by the end of the year. But I think at Buena Vista, I think they have one more really good movie that might work, or it might just backfire, and that's Doctor Strange. So we'll see how that goes. But they have been doing pretty good, and they also have a Star Wars movie because they have the Star Wars franchise now. So that's going to make a big difference. And I see those two movies, at least one of them is going to hit. It's either, if it's not Doctor Strange, it's definitely going to be the Star Wars movie at the end of this year, Rogue. So that's going to boost their sales even more. So they're going to have a big gap at the end of this year between themselves and the rest of the field. But what's amazing, though, is that, I mean, I don't know, Warner Bros. Still has a certain slate of films before the end of the year, and Suicide Squad is doing very, 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 very well, better than I expected it to do. So, I mean, when you look at the studios and what's happening with them over time, you can see that there's a progress. Warner Bros. Always maintained a certain standard. They've always had a certain market share. They've always produced more movies than everybody else. They have probably a greater variety of movies, even though I would have to give the nod to Buena Vista in terms of animation. They are the sort of people who you look at for animation right now, even though Pixar was pretty good as well, but Pixar is nowhere in the equation right now. You can see they're not even in the top. They're not even in the top anything. You know what I mean? They're not even in the top 100. That's terrible. Okay, they just kind of disappeared off the grid. We had a couple other animating companies that were doing pretty well, and they've just disappeared completely. You know what I mean? Zeitgeist, man, that's pretty much documentaries, right? Yeah, I mean, that's Pixar is nowhere to be seen. Wow. But we got Lionsgate still, Universal, Sony Columbia, and 20th Century Fox. 20th Century Fox is right in third place right now, right? But like I said, if you look at over time what's happening, you see that um, Warner Brothers is always there. It's always there at the top. Okay. Why did I state that? Well, the greatest threat out there. There are a number of studios that have a threat, but when it comes to the comic book industry, the comic book movie industry, the greatest threat to Buena Vista right now is Warner Brothers. You know, that's the truth. Paramount, what they got as their flagship is basically Transformers. And they're gonna milk that flagship until it dies, right? With Fox, they have the X-Men and they have the Fantastic Four in terms of comic book movies, right? And Transformers is not really a comic book movie, actually, because there's no comic books in circulation for Transformers at this present point in time. Also, the X-Men comic has kind of been cut short. Now, Fox Studios, 20th Century Fox Studios, they may have a gem in terms of Fantastic Four. They have X-Men, and now they also have Deadpool, right? How they play their cards will determine how that all works out. For Warner Brothers, they have the DCEU, and you can tell Warner Brothers' approach is much more foundational, much more grounded. They have much more rich story. They have very original, creative directors and writers who have it's a totally different feel and approach to comic book movies than, say, Fox does, or even Marvel, Disney, Buena Vista does approach it. Marvel, Buena Vista, Disney, and also 20th Century Fox, their approach, even Paramount's approach to comic book movies has always been to focus more on the action, to focus more on, you know, the superficial quips of the superheroes. And their stories are always superficial. I don't really see, even the X-Men stories, which are actually much more elaborate, still try to wow you on the skill sets of the X-Men. So they try to wow you on their skill sets and their powers. And that's how it's been with Marvel. That's how it's been with Marvel Disney. That's even how it is with Paramount, where you're looking at the Transformer movies. The thing that really captures you is how these things can transform, how they fight. That's the catch. That's the gimmick, right? Whereas we can clearly see that the DCEU's approach to things, Warner Brothers' approach to things, is much more, got a lot more flesh on it. You know, we look at the psychology of human beings. We look at how we interact with one another. Their films are more grounded and more realistic, and have so much more story to them. Even the villains are much more complex, and they have this degree of realism to them that makes the stories work. Whereas with the other comic book movies, you know, you can bring your kids to see them because they're not really. It's easy. It's like, as we say, it's eye candy. Even Captain America, the Winter Soldier, and Captain America, Civil War, they were basically eye candy movies. You're really looking at the action scenes, and you're really looking at, if you listen to people praise these movies, they don't really praise Captain America Civil War for its plot or its story. They praise it for the action scenes. Oh, the airport scene was great, but why would you have an airport scene? How did Iron Man find Captain America? How did they know to bring their posse to go and find Captain America? And why did Captain America have a posse to start with? The other things that really don't make sense in this movie, or so many, is what was the villain's role really? What Zemo said, he said his objective was to separate the Avengers, but how did he actually do that? And did he even succeed at doing it? And all of these things make for, you know, it's a very puzzling story. It's very superficial how the interactions, you look at even Vision with Scarlet Witch, and he's watching her and holding her back or whatever, but really it doesn't feel grounded and real what he's doing. They're debating certain things, certain principles, which is cool, but they're very superficial debates, and none of them are resolved. And that's the problem with these comic book movies. They have taken this very superficial, uh, very surface level approach. I listen to people talk about, well, the Avengers. One guy, he was saying, this guy, he should group, they should do the DCEU films this way. This guy has the same abilities as this guy, so we should pair them up and, separate them all and pair up. And it sounds so juvenile and stupid, A movie doesn't have to approach it that way. We can approach it with realism instead of surrealism. I had to suspend my belief and my logic for Captain America Civil War. I had to suspend my belief and logic for X-Men, because their world doesn't feel grounded, it doesn't feel real. It's an imaginary world just by the look of it. I have to suspend my belief a lot for Avengers movie, for a Thor movie. I have to suspend my belief for a Spider-Man movie, because the world in which Spider-Man exists does not feel grounded and real. It feels like a comic book, which is awesome. Bright colors and everything, and even the villains have bright colors, and they kind of look CGI-ish. But my point anyway is this. I'm willing to do that. But don't tell me that the DCEU, they're doing a horrible job and blah, because they ground the characters in a reality. Because they involve the world, the average citizen, the average people in the dialogue on the film, like BVS. You had actual people in this dialogue. You had news as if it was a real event in the world. We had real people from the real world interacting in these movies, real journalists, real scholars. And I thought the grounding of these films, the grounding of the DCEU films, the explanation for why Superman can fly. Nobody explains why Thor can fly, why he can use his mallet, why he can do this, that, the other. It's a lot of magic. You have to suspend your belief. Whereas with Enchantress, we get at least an explanation for how she comes out, how she possesses people. We get an explanation for why she's extending her powers using a machine, and why she's even using a machine to start with. I mean, the thing about DCEU movies, even though I had to admit that Suicide Squad had you disband your belief, especially coming down to the end, even though it reminded me a little bit of a Marvel film in that regard, but you still have this realism, this grounding, this feeling that this is something real. You literally buy into the realism. You don't really think of a DCU comic book movie as a comic book movie, even though it's a comic book movie because it's moving according to the comic books. A lot of comic book stuff and elements in it. But even so, you feel like it's very, very real, like it's the world we live in. And I think that's the difference between the DCEU and how they approach movies and how these other comic book movies approach movies. Again, Warner Brothers was the forefront in bringing us the first superhero movie that felt gritty, felt tough in Batman in 1989. Before that, Batman was seen as a colorful character, kind of like a Marvel character, funny, spit jokes, humor. Then we started having the dark humor in 1989, the fear factor, which is what Batman is. He's supposed to bring fear into the hearts of criminals. They brought all these little extra elements that were not in movies before, in comic book movies particularly. Mostly comic book movies were things that children could go and see. Because of the 1986 Batman, we had RoboCop that came out, which was a kind of pulp fiction, slightly humorous, very dark movie, very bloody, right? It was rated R. The point anyway is this, that comic book movies are going in a particular direction. Action, things to dazzle the eyes. Batman v Superman went beyond that. It went, yes, the action, but that's secondary to the science, the grounding, the realism. And that's what I loved about Batman v Superman and a lot of other people. Theatrical cut or otherwise. And why I fell in love with Man of Steel, and I'll say it again, is because of the ideologies of Man of Steel. It was a serious movie. It wasn't like a popcorn nonsense movie like the Christopher Reeve movies. I really never really liked Superman, to be honest with you. For once, Zack Snyder got me to like Superman when I saw Henry Cavill's one thing, the interrogation scene where Lois Lane is sitting at a table next to Superman, and she says, "What does the S stand for?" And he says, "It's not an S. On my planet, it means hope." That took, I was like, what? You know, how he said it and everything, I was like, what? And that blew the roof off for me. That's where I started reading Superman comics. That's where I got interested in Superman. I mean, never seen nothing like that, okay? Never. And I still believe that the DCEU is for more mature audiences. I don't think it's for little kids, really, but it'd be nice for little kids to be introduced to these concepts once the films are not too violent, you know. BVS, the theatrical cut, is not as violent as BVS, the ultimate cut, right? And the only problem I would tell Warner Brothers as they go forward with the DCEU, please do not show in your theatrical trailers all the goodies that are in the movie. Then you have nothing to look forward to. We just watch it and be like, yeah, wow, but you don't have that tremendous wow factor because we've seen basically most of the movie. So don't do that. Don't put the best parts of the movie out there in your trailers. Sometimes you gotta hold it back. Or you put some of the good parts and you just use that one trailer and you chop it up different ways. But just please don't show us everything. I hate that. That's the only thing that I think Warner Brothers is doing bad. That's why people are like, Suicide Squad and all that. But they're going to gripe and grumble and gripe because you showed the best parts of the movie in your trailers. You don't do that. So please learn from that so we can have something to surprise us. And then probably, like BVS, you guys showed almost everything of the movie in your trailers, man. Don't do that. The style, I like Warner Brothers' style. It's different. It's totally original. They need to keep on doing it. Forget what the critics say. They have their opinions. So very few of them. We're not trying to get Academy Awards. You know, somebody really does an Academy Award-worthy performance, so be it. But really and truly, it's all about the story. And so far, I'm liking what I see as a fan of this kind of storytelling. Because what got me, and this, I hope Zack Snyder sees this. What got me, Zack Snyder, is when Superman said, that was, because I was dismissing Man of Steel. I didn't want to see no Man of Steel. I was looking at it, look, who's this pretty boy? Another pretty boy like Christopher Reeve. Another Boy Scout dude who looks good and smiles and is charming. I was ready to dismiss the movie until I saw in the trailer when he said, "It's not an S. On my planet, it means hope." I was like, what? No, that really blew me away because I never thought, I always thought that Superman had an S on his chest and he was Superman. I never thought that they call him Superman. You get what I'm saying? I never knew that. They call him Superman. Humans call him Superman, but he has a name. His name's Kal-El. That's his original name. But he was renamed Clark Kent on Earth because he, you know, the parents didn't know what to call him because he didn't come with a name and they didn't know how to read Kryptonian. You know what I mean? So Kal from the House of El. That's why he's called Kal-El. Man, it's the first time I got it. I've watched all of Christopher Reeve's Supermans. I watched Brandon Routh. I watched Smallville, and I never knew this. So, I mean, that immediately appealed to me. I watched Man of Steel. Actually, anyway, I watched it 6 times. I have my own DVD of Man of Steel. I can't get enough of the movie because the movie changes everything about how I see Superman. Henry Cavill is, to me, the ultimate Superman. The Superman from the comics. Zack Snyder did something that appealed to me. I don't know about other people, but it appealed to me strongly. That's why I knew I wasn't going to miss Batman v Superman for the world, because the logic, the thinking behind Man of Steel and just how they showed the progress of Clark Kent through these flashbacks instead of going through all of that, just showing you him from a child growing up and how the parents found him out. No, that wasn't necessary. The flashbacks were, you know, What made Batman v Superman so great for me? Love the action scenes. Very realistic. You could feel every punch, very viscerally painful. It felt very, very real. It wasn't like the bop. You know, some things feel like jazz, bop, bee, bop, 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 like somebody's acting, like they're acting to fight. When I look at Captain America Civil War, I see style over substance. I don't feel the impact of the punches. I don't feel the explosions. Everything feels like bop, bop. Like it feels choreographed, right? It feels fancy, it's nice, it's a stylish movie with stylish heroes. I think style over substance, that's where I see style over substance. I may be wrong. But when I watched Batman fighting Superman, I really believed in my heart Batman was going to kill Superman. I thought he was going to kill him. Okay? Because I could feel every punch. I could feel the thuds. It was epic. Okay? Epic. You know what I mean? I'm not trying to put down Civil War. Just for me, I felt the punches. You get what I'm saying? It didn't feel like just a choreographed fight on a screen for me. It felt very, very real. When Zod was fighting Jor-El, that fight sequence felt viscerally real. When he slammed Zod into the wall and he fell down on the ground. When Zod pulled out the spike and stabbed Jor-El up in his side, I felt that, man. There's something about realism that makes you feel it. And that's what I get from these DCEU films. I get the realism, not just the grittiness. It's one thing to go gritty, right? Val Kilmer's Batman Forever was not gritty. It was not visceral. I didn't feel anything. I felt visceral hate for Lex Luthor. I wanted Lex Luthor to die. He was an annoying but scary, pesky kind of guy. When I saw Amanda Waller on the screen, I hated her. It's a visceral reaction I felt. You don't get that with other comic book movies. When I saw General Zod, I felt a certain degree of pity for him. I empathized with the situation that he was born a certain way. But yet he was so mean and so evil that I understood he needed to be destroyed. I felt that. That's the kind of, for me, I can only tell you about myself, that's what I feel when I watch a Warner Brother film. When you say Warner Brothers, whether it is that they're doing animation or whether it is they're putting out a featured movie, there comes a certain expectation with a Warner Brother logoed film. Whether it's The Matrix, whether it is, you know, a Shawshank Redemption, whatever it is, once you say Warner Brothers, there is a certain degree of expectation of realism in those films and creativity. You expect a Warner Brother film not to be like another kind of film out there. And they never let me down. Except for Batman and Robin, which was just a horrible mess, which I don't want to remember. And I don't want to remember, I really don't want to remember, but I have to, Batman Forever as well. Those two Batman films, don't like them, okay? I even like Superman Returns better than those two Batman films. Superman Returns is an okay film when it comes to those. Green Lantern, I can still at least follow the story of Green Lantern some. To me, it's even a better story than those Batman Forever films and Batman and Robin. In fact, I'll say Catwoman with Halle Berry is a better film than Batman and Robin and Batman Forever. I don't like George Clooney and Val Kilmer as Batman. That never fit the role. They never did. They tried. It never happened. That's me. I can't talk for anyone else. I won't be doing facts here. That's not factual at all. This is completely subjective. Okay? Catwoman wasn't such a bad movie. Sharon Stone and Halle Berry, it wasn't that bad. I actually kind of dig some of the things Halle Berry was doing with Catwoman. You know, she wasn't trying to be, she did not cover, she did not sort of encapsulate what Catwoman was in her entirety. But then again, we're looking at Selina Kyle in her early beginnings, so I didn't expect it to be exactly like Catwoman, okay? However, what Christopher Nolan did was he totally departed from everything that had to do with that stuff, right? He was like, you know what, let me just go down a whole different direction, right? And reinvent the wheel on certain things, because people so much did not like Batman and Robin that Christopher Nolan needed to go in a completely different direction, you know, to try to make people forget about Batman and Robin, to try to make people forget about Catwoman, to try and make people forget about Green Lantern. Green Lantern actually came out in between the Christopher Nolan trilogy, which I thought was a bad thing, because they really wanted to launch the DCEU, but Nolan had his thing, you know. It was like the Wachowski brothers. They wanted to do the rest of the Matrix, and Nolan was very successful in his second one with The Dark Knight, so, you know, you gotta give the guy his props. So I get why Nolan succeeded, because Warner Brothers went down a road where, I mean, they had, I think it was 3 flops in a row. They had Batman and Robin, they had Catwoman, I think, and then I think they had Green Lantern. That was miserable flops. And in between there, we had Batman Begins, and then we had The Dark Knight, which was a huge success, right? But my point anyway is this. The creativity is what I liked. I'm glad Schumacher did not get any more movies to make, and I'm glad his last movie was a flop, because, quite frankly, I just could not take in those Batman, okay? Schumacher's Batman, I just didn't like them. I'm sorry. I know what Schumacher was trying to do. He was trying to appeal to the younger audience, and he was trying to do a kind of like a Disney film where you can appeal to the younger and the older audience. So you had all these colors, and it was more cartoony. I get it. But you can't do that after coming off of a Batman movie and a Batman Returns movie, which, yes, they were surrealistic, but they had a lot of grittiness and, you know, humanity to the characters. And people were like, oh, Batman Returns was too dark, so let's go with Schumacher's version. Jeez, and ages, man. Anyway, and in Superman Returns, why that failed is really simple. There was a time when people would have bought into Superman of the 70s as depicted by Christopher Reeve on the screen. There ain't nobody in the 80s and 90s that's going to accept, or 2000s, is going to accept Superman of the 70s, that depiction on the screen. It's just not going to happen. And what they tried to do is they tried to make the movie kind of serious stoned with Brandon Routh as Superman. But what is Brandon Routh doing? You see what I'm saying? He's just continuing a Christopher Reeve story. You don't do that. People were actually getting tired of that Christopher Reeve story. Superman 4 is testament to that. So nobody wanted to see Christopher Reeve. That version of Superman had its time. Right? Those people are holding on to that old Superman. Oh, Superman needs to be... And it's not even... There are aspects of that Superman which are canon. Okay? Of the Christopher Reeve Superman, which is canon. Alright? He's always been your friendly neighborhood friend. He would talk to people. He was somebody who always helped. Right? Had heat ray vision. Dressed up in the suit. The suit kind of looked like Superman, right? But other than that and the goodly heart of Superman that Christopher Reeves had, that Superman was just way too overpowered. That Superman had magical powers. He could kiss somebody and make their memory disappear. There's no canyon like that. You gotta understand what I'm saying. That Superman was able to turn back time. I'm not saying Superman in the comics is not able to do that and hasn't been able to do that, but he's been depowered over the years, okay? Obviously, that Superman, with the aid of the Flash, or the aid of certain technology can go into alternative universes. We know, and universes interlap with each other. We have what's called a multiverse. So I get that. But come on, man. Turning back time by spinning around the earth and making the earth turn in the opposite direction. First of all, the gravitational pull of the earth, everybody would fall off the earth's surface. People would be burned up by the atmosphere if you tried to do something like that. Doesn't make physical sense. Okay. Then the world Superman is in is just so unrealistic. People are totally accepting of him. And only one or two people are supervillains in that world. It's just ridiculous. Ridiculous. I'm recording. And so when you put that into perspective, that world is not canon. I'm not saying, oh, well, actually, it's kind of canon. It's kind of canon in the beginning. Superman was, first of all, if you look at other iterations of Superman on TV, etc., Superman wasn't so hyper-powered, okay? The first thing he started off, he could leap buildings in a single bound. He could move faster than a speeding bullet, faster than a locomotive, etc. And then he got more powers. But at a certain point in time, man, you can't have them kind of ridiculous powers, man. Okay? And that's the kind of logic we have. Certain fans, certain fans can't seem to connect what they've seen in one movie and realize that was for that movie. This is a total reboot. And when you have a reboot, you don't necessarily have the characteristics of a particular character that was from another movie. I heard some clueless people say, well, this is the older, Ben Affleck's Batman is the older Christopher Nolan Batman. No, he's not. He's in a totally different universe. Things work differently. He probably has a different history. Nolan's trilogy was an Elseworld film to start with. And second of all, Nolan's trilogy is based on a literal world. If there was a literal world, this is what these people would look like, how they would behave. There would be no superheroes in that world. So you can't take that Batman and put him into the DCEU. You can't. Nor the characters in that world. Alright? Christopher Nolan's trilogy stops at a trilogy. It doesn't go beyond that. Right? And you guys talk about, oh, we need Christopher Nolan in the DCEU. Well, guess what? Christopher Nolan's the dude that created the Superman of this universe and grounded the Batman of this universe. He helped Zack Snyder do that. So you can't be talking about we need Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan's done his part to make sure he jumpstart the DCEU so they didn't flop. Okay, and did an excellent job. He actually is the guy behind the story of Superman. Okay? And then David Goyer, he's the one that actually wrote the script. Okay? And then after that, Christopher Nolan still hung around with Zack Snyder and they had a discussion about what should happen to Superman. Not only with Superman, but they also had a discussion about how Batman's role would play. Zack and Christopher Nolan had to consult with one another. Because while Zack is directing the film, Christopher Nolan was the executive producer. His name was going to be on that thing. Okay? He's not on Suicide Squad because he doesn't need to be on Suicide Squad. But the character Batman continued there. The Flash continued in there and so on. Okay? Warner Brothers works like that. You do a successful film, you become executive producer for another film. That's just the way how things work. Now, anyway, my point is this. You cannot have a continuity between a Christopher Reeve Superman and a Henry Cavill Superman. They're not the same Superman. Okay? And don't tell me Henry Cavill Superman needs to be like Christopher Reeve Superman. I know what you mean. In terms of values and morals and so on. And quite frankly, Henry Cavill Superman has those things. Alright? He's not flawed in any way. It's just he's growing up to be the Superman you guys want him to be. And you'll see that Superman very, very, very soon. Okay? But he's more of Superman from the comics. And what do I mean by that? I mean that whereas Christopher Reeve was playing up charm and trying to smile a lot and was kind of gliding through the sky, but he couldn't fight for a fly, and so couldn't the other Superman in Superman Returns. Was very lame how he fought. Didn't have much definition either. Henry Cavill's Superman encapsulates what you would see if you would have watched Warner Brothers DCU animations of Superman, or if you would have watched Superman in the comics. He fights like Superman. He has the same strength of Superman, where he can withstand certain things, but a nuclear blast he cannot really withstand. He has a limited amount of speed. He has super speed, but he has a limited amount of speed, like Superman has. That's why the Flash is quicker than him, which makes sense. Whereas Christopher Reeve's Superman was just ridiculous. He had infinite amount of speed, so that he could actually go back into time. He's not the Flash. You can't make Superman the Flash. You get what I'm saying? So a lot of limits were put on Superman, as were limits put on Superman in the comics, as were limits put on Superman in Smallville. And this Superman is more related to the Superman of Smallville, if you guys know the Smallville television series. He's more of a spin-off of that Superman than he is of the Christopher Reeve Superman, which was just too highly powered, had too many abilities, had magic at his disposal, just in an idiotic world which made no sense, which was just willing to accept him on the drop of a dime. And then he was this idiotic reporter, Clark Kent, who is not as idiotic as we see him in the movie. And all of that just does not fit too well for me. Now, it's a campy Superman and everything, and it fit for its time, and it will always be a classic for its time, but absolutely cannot be used out of its time. So this Superman I really like and appreciate. I don't know how he's going to come back, but I do believe that when he comes back, having experienced and being baptized by all of the challenges that he could possibly have, he's probably going to have other challenges, but those challenges he possibly could have, this is going to be the Superman that you guys are going to really appreciate having around. But having said that, it's not the same as Christopher Reeve's Superman, so don't expect from this Superman what you saw with Christopher Reeve's Superman. It's a totally different movie. It's a kind of Elseworld Superman as well. And yes, Henry Cavill's Superman has the same values as Christopher Reeve's Superman does. He just don't have that magic. He don't kiss people and they don't remember, or he goes speeding off around the world and turning back time. Those things are not, this Superman doesn't do that. Okay? Can't do it. He's not able to do it. He has limits. He doesn't have infinite hearing. He doesn't have infinite sight. He doesn't have infinite speed. He doesn't have infinite strength. Okay? Only weakened by kryptonite. That's for Christopher Reeve. That's Christopher Reeve's Superman. Okay? This Superman has limits. Okay? As the Superman in the comics. That's why he was killed by Doomsday. Because he has limits. He's not immortal. Okay? And kryptonite is not the only thing that can kill him. So once you've got that out of your processing, and you can see Batman for who he is and all these other comics, and understand the realism that Warner Brothers is trying to have, so that this, you really ask the question, what if Superman was here? Then you can really enjoy this movie BVS, and you don't ask these really ridiculous questions. I heard a guy, he said, I know I'm going pretty long, but forgive me, I don't know if you guys will watch this video all this way, but whatever. One guy told me, well, you know, Superman, Lois Lane, she gasped when Superman was there to save her when Lex Luthor threw her off the building, but he couldn't hear his mother being kidnapped when she was screaming. And I'm like, man, this guy really doesn't understand Superman. Superman was up in the mountains, wherever he was, whether it was Mexico, wherever he was up in the mountains, far, far away from Smallville, far, far away from Metropolis, far, far away from Gotham. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that he was too far away to hear his mother screaming. And, obviously, if you've watched the Ultimate Cut, he was also too far away to hear Lois Lane screaming when she was kidnapped. Why I say this is because of this. I'm trying to tell you that it was when he was making his way back He was probably in Metropolis at the time that he heard Lois Lane screaming, and he went and saved her. And she said, "You came back," indicating that Superman was in the area. He had left Metropolis and Washington, D.C., or wherever Lois Lane was. My point anyway is this. Superman does not have indefinite or infinite hearing. He doesn't have it. And we learned that in Man of Steel, and we saw that again in Batman v Superman. He also needs to focus in on what he needs to hear. Otherwise he'd go mad. So these are things we already knew coming into Batman v Superman for Man of Steel. And if you didn't know it, guess what? Batman v Superman repeated it so you would know. Superman had to be in Nairobi, Africa to save Lois Lane. There was no other way. He wasn't going to be all the way in the United States. That's too far away. He obviously stalks Lois Lane, goes to Nairobi, Africa. If you look at Superman when he was flying around the world in Man of Steel, flew through Africa, he flew through different places and continents. It took him a pretty long time to get there. It took him minutes. And it takes him a much longer time to fly around the world. It's not that fast. Right? Flash is a lot faster than him. So you got to understand the limits of Superman. And then he won't ask silly questions. He won't ask silly things. Silly things. The other thing that really gets me is the Martha scene. I hear some really retarded people, "Oh, their mother's name was Martha," or they say Martha. And I'm like, do you know how retarded you sound? You sound like a retarded person. Because the Martha scene was the heart of Batman v Superman. And you trying to make fun of that shows me how stupid you are. That's what you tell me. You tell me it's like a cretin. It's like a mentally retarded person saying, "Martha." Martha. Because he is too retarded to understand the significance of what that scene meant. So every time I see somebody, "Martha," I think immediately, cretin, retarded, stupid. Because it's obvious the scene transforms Batman, and it's the only way Superman can get to Batman. So I'm flabbergasted that people actually make that into a joke, or they think it's funny. To me, it's not funny at all. Every time they say it, it's like I'm thinking retard. They say Martha, I say retard. In my head, I'm like, what a retard. They don't know how stupid they sound. Yeah, y'all, I know I went really, really long, but I hope you guys enjoyed this anyway. You guys have a great one.